For the most part, when an actor or director settle into their careers in the film industry, that's where they stay. In some cases, they also take on the role of producer for movies, but usually stick in their chosen creative lane. But there are always a few that decide to make the leap from one art form to another. In this video, I want to take a look at the directors that started off as actors, but found that being in the director's chair was also pretty comfortable. Most of them also kept acting as well, but they're as well known, if not better known, for their work as directors than as actors. I think Clint Eastwood might be the best known actor that then transitioned to directing, but has kept a foot in either camp. Over a career that spans 65 years, Eastwood's been remarkably productive and consistent, even though he's well into his 90s now. The guy even wrapped filming on Juror number 2 in April of 2024. Eastwood started doing small, uncredited roles in movies in the 1950s and slowly moved up to becoming a leading man. It was 1964's A Fistful of Dollars, which itself is an unofficial remake of Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo. The movie was a wild success and it led to 2 sequels that were even more successful, 1965's For a Few Dollars More and 1966's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. The movie cemented Eastwood's status as a leading man for the rest of his life, and movies like 1971's Dirty Harry, 1973's High Plains Drifter, 1974's Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, and 1976's The Outlaw Josie Wales would help cement it. And that's only a few films from half of one decade. He started directing with 1971's Play Misty for Me, where he plays a DJ being stalked by a fan. For Eastwood, transitioning into directing was more of a natural thing and not necessarily something that he expected would happen. In his words, quote, "After 17 years of bouncing my head against the wall, hanging around sets, maybe influencing certain camera setups with my own opinions, watching actors go through all kinds of hell without any help, and working with both good directors and bad ones, I'm at the point where I'm ready to make my own pictures. I stored away all the mistakes I made and saved up all the good things I learned, and now I know enough to control my own projects and get what I want out of actors," end quote. The movie, like many of Eastwood's directorial features, was a moneymaker and well-liked by critics. Thanks to his being an actor, he knew how to coax other actors into giving excellent performances, and, perhaps as a result of his nature, or by working his way up doing relatively mid-budget films instead of blockbusters, he's always maintained a wicked efficiency. Eastwood said, quote, "I have a reputation for always going with the first or second take," end quote, because, quote, "I want to get the feeling that we're moving. You have to keep the crew and the production going at a business-like pace so they get the feeling they are part of something that's actually moving forward," end quote. More takes also meant more money, and as Eastwood also produced his films, that meant that they might be wasting his money. With him, actors are always prepared. They know that they might only have one take to get it right, so they better get it right in that one take. He also likes to keep his sets calm and comfortable. That way, he says, actors can really dive deep into their character and give a confident performance. They don't have to worry that if they screw up, he'll be yelling and screaming at them like James Cameron might do, or might make them do dozens of takes like Stanley Kubrick would. Since the 80s, he's mostly acted in the movies that he's also directed, though there have been a few exceptions like 1980's Any Which Way You Can with Buddy Van Horn, 1984's City Heart with Richard Benjamin, 1993's In the Line of Fire with Wolfgang Petersen, and 2012's Trouble with a Curve directed by Robert Lawrence. The fact that he's still directing now is nothing short of a miracle. Ben Affleck and Matt Damon pretty much started their careers together, first as actors and then as writers. Good Will Hunting propelled the two into Hollywood stardom when they were both in their mid-20s, and things were smooth sailing for a while. But soon, their careers began to diverge. Damon kept acting, starring in franchises like the Ocean's trilogy and the Bourne series. And while some of Affleck's big-budget movies did alright at the box office, like 2001's Pearl Harbor, 2002's The Sum of All Fears, and 2003's Daredevil, they also got whopped by critics. The rough patch continued in the mid-2000s thanks to movies like 2003's Gigli, directed by Martin Brest, and 2004's Jersey Girl, directed by Kevin Smith. His star was bright, but all of a sudden, it started to dim considerably. This is something that happens to a lot of actors. They suffer a downturn in fortune, and if they're not careful, it never really stops until they're washed up. It coincided with a period of heavy negative press coverage surrounding his relationship with Jennifer Lopez, as well as a lackluster quality of the scripts that he was getting. If he had continued acting, he felt that his career might suffer even more. Stopping the downward spiral required something of a reinvention of who he was. He needed to become a triple threat: an actor, a writer, and a director. He ascribes his directorial turn to Gigli. Martin Brest is a genuinely great director. The guy made Beverly Hills Cop, and it's unfortunate that he hasn't directed since 2003. But Affleck said that he learned a lot about the art of directing from Brest. When the movie flopped, grossing just over $7 million on that $75 million budget, Affleck said that he didn't have any other options. Quote, "But if the reaction to Gigli hadn't happened, I probably wouldn't have ultimately decided I don't really have any other avenue but to direct movies, which has turned out to be the real love of my professional life. So, in those ways, it's a gift," end quote. To an extent, his directorial turn was born of necessity, but it also freed him up to do the one thing he really seemed to enjoy. He made his directorial debut with 2007's Gone Baby Gone, and what a debut it was. It did alright commercially, but more importantly, was a critical success. Rotten Tomatoes critics' consensus for the movie reads, quote, "Ben Affleck proves his directing credentials in this gripping, dramatic thriller, drawing strong performances from the excellent cast and bringing working-class Boston to the screen," end quote. It even earned actress Amy Ryan an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress and would land on several top 10 lists for the year. Of it, Affleck said, quote, "I loved making it, and I'm trying to keep a primary emphasis on directing. All I need is people willing to give me money for our next movie and one after that," end quote. And the money kept rolling in, because not only was Affleck a great director, he was a great director that made money. 2010's The Town was a critical and commercial success, while Argo took him to the peak of Hollywood. Not only was it another critical and commercial success, but it won Affleck a Best Picture Academy Award. Affleck has also decided to keep up his acting career with other directors. He's only directed around half a dozen films since 2007, so it's not the only thing he does, but I think it's something that he's going to keep returning to in the future. It feels a bit weird putting Quentin Tarantino on this list, but I'm going to roll with it. After all, before getting into directing, Tarantino dreamed of becoming an actor and was even able to land a couple of gigs. He started off acting in plays when he was in school and landed a role as an Elvis Presley impersonator on an episode of The Golden Girls in 1988. He directed and acted in a few films he made himself and decided to start going to acting school as well. It was an acting school that he decided that he wanted to direct instead. He specified two reasons that led to his turn to directing. In his words, quote, "When I wanted to be an actor, I wanted to work with this director. Not work with this actor, I wanted to work for this director," end quote. But more importantly, he wanted to be able to make the films his. In his words, quote, "At a certain point, I just realized that I loved movies too much to simply appear in them. I wanted the movies to be my movies," end quote. But Tarantino never wanted directing to be just a job. He said that making movies had to feel like a calling to him, that it had to be the most important thing in his life and not just something that he did as a vocation. The best way to do this was to be with the project from beginning to end, from idea to execution. One of Tarantino's hallmarks is that he's a writer-director. He's never directed a movie that he also hasn't written, meaning every project that he's worked on has been with him from the beginning. That said, he did do just the writing or story for a few movies, like True Romance, Natural Born Killers, and From Dusk Till Dawn, that were then directed by other directors. Tarantino, both like and unlike most filmmakers, learned on the job. Clint Eastwood and Ben Affleck had been working as actors for years before they made the leap into directing, and so had the benefit of being able to learn from afar during those years. Not Tarantino though. No, for him, it was something like a trial by fire, besides the little bit that he had learned from the acting classes. But what Tarantino had that several other directors might not have had was a deep-rooted love for film. In his words, quote, "When people ask me if I went to film school, I tell them no, I went to films," end quote. He worked at a video store, Video Archives, in Manhattan Beach, and when he wasn't working, he was watching movies. Over thousands of films, you begin to form an idea of what you like and what you don't like, as well as what looks good. He employed everything that he enjoyed and learned on the script for Reservoir Dogs, which, by luck, found its way to Harvey Keitel, who was willing to produce it so Tarantino and his friend Lawrence Bender would have an easier time finding funding. Tarantino is historically important as well. Without movies like Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, Independent movies that most studios wouldn't want to touch with a 10-foot pole thanks to their violence and language would find champions in studios like Miramax. That helped kickstart the independent decade of the 90s, a movement that Tarantino helped lead. And while he has had small roles in movies over the years, it's safe to say that writing and directing was his true calling. Greta Gerwig had quite the natural entry into directing. There wasn't an inciting incident like there was for Ben Affleck. She wanted to be a playwright, but after getting rejected from all of the MFA programs that she applied to, she started acting instead. Her first feature was 2006's LOL, and for her second feature, 2007's Hannah Takes the Stairs, she also co-wrote the screenplay. For her fifth feature, 2008's Nights and Weekends, she co-wrote the screenplay and co-directed. But it would be a while before she sat in the director's chair again. Instead, she focused on two things. One was acting, which took up most of her time between 2008 and 2016. She was in at least 2 movies between each of those years, except 2013 when she had no movies. The other thing was writing. She would co-write screenplays every few years for movies that she was in. 2010's Northern Comfort, 2012's Frances Ha, and 2015's Mistress America. In 2017, she finally took the leap and directed her first solo feature that she also wrote, Lady Bird. By this point, she had been working at it for a full decade and had learned a lot on both sides of the camera and in the weeds of the story. With Lady Bird, she had a movie that was also deeply personal to her, the turbulent relationship between a mother and daughter set in Sacramento, where Gerwig was from. Her attachment to the story was evident from the length of the script, 350 pages that she would eventually pare down to a 94-minute long movie. For Gerwig, there really wasn't anyone that could direct the movie besides her. In her words, quote, "I thought, yes, there is more to learn, but you are not going to keep learning it by not doing it. You will only now learn the next part if you go ahead and do it," end quote. She had an in with producer Scott Rudin, who also produced Frances Ha, and having cut her teeth doing small independent films, she continued that streak here. Lady Bird had a tiny $10 million budget and made an astounding $79 million at the box office, an unqualified success, and would get several Academy Award nominations, including Best Direction, though it wouldn't win any. The story was much the same for her next feature, Little Women, another critical and commercial success, and the movie that helped land Gerwig the role for the biggest movie of her career so far, Barbie, which ended up being the highest grossing movie of 2023. Since she started as an actor, Gerwig also has a very actor-focused directing style, saying that her writing and directing is all about the actors. That doesn't mean that she likes improvisation though. It seems like it's actually quite the contrary. According to a New York Times article for Lady Bird, quote, "There was no improvisation on set, and the movie matches the shooting script probably 95%, end quote. Where she goes after Barbie and Snow White, what she's writing, is anyone's guess, but it'll probably be on something bigger. According to her agent, Jeremy Barber, quote, "Her ambition is to be not the biggest woman director, but a big studio director," end quote. The man that set the template for what an independent director is, or should be, is, without a doubt, John Cassavetes. There's a wonderful 3-hour and 20-minute long documentary on Cassavetes called A Constant Forge, and that sums him up pretty well. Cassavetes was always working, splitting his time between being an actor and being a director. Acting began as a way to sustain his life, but eventually it was simply a way to make the money he needed to direct a movie. That was important because Cassavetes preferred to self-finance his movies. That way, he would have the final say, and there would be no studio telling him that he needed to do this or that in order to make the film more appealing. His first directed feature was 1959's Shadows, and he would constantly, reliably, put out a directed feature every few years between 1959 and 1986 when health reasons forced him to stop. Cassavetes would also appear in other films from directors because he loved being on the screen. He was in movies like 1967's The Dirty Dozen, which earned him a Best Supporting Actor nomination, 1968's Rosemary's Baby, 1975's Capone, 1976's Mikey and Nicky, and 1978's The Fury. Early on in his directing career, he signed a 2-picture deal with Paramount that left a bad taste in his mouth. It was on his second directed feature, Too Late Blues, that he knew studio filmmaking was not for him. He said that, quote, "It's a system based on departments and department heads and chiefs. I'm not very good at dealing with department heads because I'm not concerned with their problems," end quote. Still, he found himself in an odd position. After the movie performed poorly at the box office, he ended up getting a lucrative contract to do a third film, A Child is Waiting. He called it a painful experience and would clash with producer Stanley Kramer and writer Abby Mann. He turned in a version he was satisfied with, but found that Kramer edited it behind his back. Cassavetes hit the roof, smacked Kramer after it was screened, and vowed never to make another commercial film again. That was just as well, because his first feature after turned out to be Faces, a landmark independent film. The entire $275,000 budget was also self-financed by Cassavetes through fees he had already earned from directing and acting. That's one of the most admirable things about him. He put his money where his mouth is and had an overwhelming, well-placed confidence in himself. Interestingly, Steven Spielberg also worked as a PA on Faces, saying, quote, "I got them coffee, I got them anything they wanted," end quote. It's also important to note the contributions by Jenna Rollins, Cassavetes' wife and one of the greatest actresses of the 20th century, and who Richard Brody at The New Yorker called, quote, "the most important and original movie actor of the past half-century plus," end quote. Without Rollins, there would be no Cassavetes. She would continue to pay the bills when Cassavetes was working on his directorial features, and the two would stay married until he died in 1989. Unlike the productions that Eastwood runs, Cassavetes was much more free-flowing. Actors could take as much or as little time as they needed to get their characters down, and Cassavetes would shut down production if needed to fix the script or something like that. A film wasn't just a film, one and done, for Cassavetes. This was a way of life, and the schedule was less important than getting it exactly as he wanted it. That's evident from the post-production time, 30 months. Entire movies are conceptualized, written, acted, edited, and completed within 2.5 years. But, again, Cassavetes wanted to get it right. His style worked for him, and he stuck with it. By the time he died, he had dozens of unproduced screenplays. A constant forge indeed. Unlike the other actors on this list, Mel Gibson almost had to be coaxed into becoming a director. He started as an actor in the late 70s and quickly hit his stride in 1979's Mad Max, only the second feature film he was ever in, and he continued acting at pace for around a decade and a half before he decided to try his hand at directing. According to Robert Downey Jr., who worked with Gibson for 1990's Air America and whose career Gibson would help save later on, studio executives wanted Gibson to direct a movie, but he just said that he didn't want to be a director. He would act in several more movies before finally deciding to give directing a chance. His first directorial feature was 1993's The Man Without a Face, which did well enough critically and commercially, but it was his next directed feature, 1995's Braveheart, that really put him on the map as a director to watch. At first, despite liking the script, he declined to be involved in the project at all. Only after he kept coming back to the script did he come back to the project. Then he agreed only to direct it. He wanted someone else to play William Wallace, like Brad Pitt or Jason Patric. But Paramount would only agree to provide funding if Gibson was also on the screen, so reluctantly, he also accepted the starring role. Doing double duty was not easy, and Gibson would lose 15 pounds over the course of the production despite trying to put on weight. It ended up being a critical and commercial success, winning Mel Gibson Best Picture and Best Director at the Academy Awards. Not bad for someone's second directorial feature. His future directorial features, like 2004's The Passion of the Christ, 2006's Apocalypto, and 2016's Hacksaw Ridge, were similar, either critical or commercial successes or both. At one point, he even considered doing fewer acting roles and focusing on directing instead, though things didn't work out that way. In fact, 2022 was his most productive acting year yet. He was in 7 movies that year. He's in the middle of directing a movie now, though I think the one that I'm most excited for is the Lethal Weapon movie that he intends to direct. Richard Donner's Lethal Weapon is a buddy cop masterpiece, and I think the legacy is safe in the hands of Mel Gibson. I left off a lot of actors-directors and actors-turned-directors. Orson Welles, Charlie Chaplin, Charles Laughton, Buster Keaton, Olivia Wilde, Angelina Jolie, Bradley Cooper, Sean Penn, Warren Beatty, Jordan Peele, and so many more. Directing, to an extent, is a natural extension of acting or writing, but it's always a surprise when someone decides to cross from one to the other or to keep their feet in both worlds. In many cases, though, it turns out to be exactly the right move. A lot of actor-directors have found considerable success on both sides of the aisle, and usually, when they do decide to make a movie, they almost never make just one. It's like a bug or something. You make one, and then you do another, and another, and another, until, at some point, you just can't stop.